Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into what is honestly an incredible historical anomaly. When we think of the Second World War, we usually picture these grinding, multi-year campaigns, right? Heavily entrenched front lines, drawn-out sieges, total devastation. But history is full of surprises, and the German invasion of Denmark basically defies every single expectation we have about wartime resistance. To really grasp what happened, we actually need a brief bit of history before the takeover. You see, Denmark had successfully maintained strict neutrality during the First World War. While the rest of Europe was bogged down in brutal trench warfare, Denmark managed to stay completely out of the fray and emerged totally unscathed. Well, that success created a profound but ultimately false sense of security. Coming into World War II, they genuinely thought they could pull off the exact same trick. They leaned heavily on a non-aggression pact they signed with Nazi Germany in 1939, really believing that piece of paper would protect them. But we're going to explore how a sovereign European nation, with its very own government and military, was completely overtaken by an invading force in less time than it takes most of us to finish a single workday.
6. That is the exact number of hours it took for Denmark to completely surrender to Nazi Germany on April 9, 1940. Literally just 6 hours. Think about the massive, sprawling scale of battles like Stalingrad or Normandy, and then look at this invasion. Because of this unbelievably rapid capitulation, there were only 16 Danish military casualties during the invasion itself. 16! When you compare that to the millions of devastating losses suffered by other nations during the war, the mathematical disparity is simply staggering. It stands out as one of the absolute shortest military operations of the entire Second World War.
Okay, so let's dive into this. How does an entire nation fall before lunch? Imagine starting your morning routine as a citizen of a free, neutral democracy. You wake up, you get ready for work, and by your mid-morning coffee break, your nation's sovereignty is entirely gone and you are living under Nazi occupation. It's this massive central mystery that demands an explanation. Why did Germany attack despite the non-aggression pact? And how did the Danish government, a proud democracy, find itself raising the white flag almost immediately? To understand the why and the how behind this astonishing event, we have to zoom out and look at the larger map of Europe.
Section 1. Why invade neutral Denmark? The geopolitical stepping stone.
The crazy thing is, the German High Command didn't even have a strong desire to conquer Denmark just for the sake of having Denmark. It wasn't an important primary objective at all. Instead, Denmark was basically just a tragic victim of geography. Germany desperately needed it to secure a much larger, far more strategic prize to the north. The true target was actually Norway. German military planners knew an invasion of Norway was going to be an absolute logistical nightmare. To effectively project their naval and air power into the North Sea and the North Atlantic, they required a stepping stone, and that crucial stepping stone was the Aalborg airfield situated in northern Jutland. Without securing those specific runways in Denmark, flying combat and supply missions into Norway would have been incredibly risky, if not literally impossible. Hitler ultimately settled the debate by personally deciding to invade Denmark and Norway simultaneously.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the Danes just couldn't hold out. Look at this topography comparison. On one hand, you have Norway, right? Rugged, mountainous terrain where a drawn-out, defensive guerrilla resistance is highly feasible. On the other hand, you have Denmark. It is incredibly flat. It shares a direct, wide-open land border with Germany right to its south. It was practically custom-made for technologically superior, rapid panzer tank attacks. And here is a vivid, truly tragic historical detail for you. When the invasion began, some Danish soldiers literally rode out on bicycles to face those German panzer tanks. It paints such a devastating and memorable picture of the mismatched military capability. Because of pre-war policies meant to avoid antagonizing Germany, the tiny Danish army was so poorly equipped that sustained military resistance was, quite literally, mathematically impossible.
Section 2. April 9. The invasion. A timeline of the morning.
Operation Weserübung kicked off with absolutely chilling coordination. Let's walk through this timeline together to truly grasp the lightning-fast speed of the assault. At exactly 4:15 a.m., German ground forces crossed the neutral border. At almost the exact same time, German naval auxiliaries executed a massive surprise landing right at the docks in the capital city of Copenhagen. As troops disembarked and secured strategic locations, German bomber planes roared ominously overhead. But instead of bombs, they dropped the infamous Avprop propaganda leaflets. Avprop translates to attention or call. I mean, imagine the sheer psychological shock of waking up at dawn to thousands of green papers fluttering down from enemy bombers, claiming the Germans were just there to protect Denmark from the British and French. Faced with overwhelming, undeniable force from land, sea, and air, the Danish government formally surrendered before 10 a.m.
The official Danish cabinet decision was to bow to the German pressure, under protest. Now, you might be wondering, why give up so fast? You really have to understand the massive burden of leadership weighing on Prime Minister Thorvald Stoning and King Christian X in that moment. They were terrified. They knew their flat terrain and bicycles offered exactly zero defense, but more importantly, they had just seen what happened to Warsaw in Poland a few months prior. They were terrified that if they fought back just to defend their national pride, the Luftwaffe would ruthlessly bomb Copenhagen into ash and rubble, resulting in tens of thousands of civilian casualties. So, they made the highly pragmatic, albeit humiliating calculation to swallow their pride and surrender entirely, just to save Danish lives.
Section 3, the Model Protectorate, the era of uneasy cooperation.
That immediate morning surrender led to a very, very unique occupation. It created a dynamic that German soldiers jokingly called the Cream Front, because it was such an easy, peaceful posting with abundant Danish dairy products readily available to the troops. Germany really wanted Denmark to be their model protectorate. But for the Danes, this era was defined by one crucial term, Samarbejdspolitikken, the cooperation policy. Unlike almost anywhere else in occupied Europe, the Danish government didn't flee into exile in London. The Danish parliament, the police, the courts, and the civil administration all just continued to function. King Christian X famously stayed right in Copenhagen, riding his horse through the city's streets every single day without an armed guard. It was this silent, deeply powerful act of psychological resistance that reminded citizens of their enduring sovereignty. They basically formed an uneasy, daily coalition with a totalitarian regime, specifically to shield their citizens from the full, brutal realities of Nazi rule.
So, the crucial point here is understanding the massive moral gray area of this policy. Notice where the lines were drawn in this high-stakes tightrope walk. The Danish government made some extremely heavy concessions. They unconstitutionally outlawed the Communist Party, they accepted strict press censorship, and they redirected their industrial and agricultural trade to literally feed the German war machine. But look at the absolute red lines they held firm on. They outright refused German demands to introduce anti-Jewish legislation. They completely refused to implement the death penalty for sabotage. And they flatly refused to allow Danish army units to fall under German military command. It was a massive trade-off. They sacrificed certain democratic ideals to protect human lives.
Section 4. Resistance and Rescue. The 1943 Breakdown.
Because, of course, this fragile balance of cooperation couldn't last forever. By 1943, as the tide of the broader war turned and the German military actually began suffering major defeats in Russia and North Africa, the mood in Denmark shifted drastically. The public grew bold and increasingly hostile to the occupiers. Widespread strikes and civil disturbances broke out across the entire country in the summer of 1943. Germany demanded martial law and the death penalty for saboteurs, but the Danish government definitively refused and essentially ceased functioning entirely. With the cooperation policy totally broken down, open resistance absolutely exploded. In a moment of incredible dramatic imagery, the Royal Danish Navy scuttled 32 of its own beautiful ships right in the harbor, just sinking them straight to the bottom of the sea to keep them out of German hands. Resistance groups blew up railways to delay German troops heading south, and Danish intelligence supplied operational information to the British that Field Marshal Montgomery later called second to none.
But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Danish resistance is represented by this number right here, 7,000. When the Germans took direct military control in the fall of 1943, they finally ordered the removal and deportation of all Jews from Denmark. However, a sympathetic German diplomat leaked the plan. What followed wasn't some organized military operation. It was a massive, spontaneous act of sheer civilian solidarity. Ordinary Danes, neighbors, doctors, fishermen, they risked their own lives under the cover of darkness. Out in the freezing waters of the Baltic, small fishing boats made these incredibly perilous trips past German patrols to secretly hide and ferry approximately 7,000 Danish Jews, which was the vast majority of the country's Jewish population, across the water to safety in neutral Sweden. And they managed to accomplish this whole operation in just a matter of weeks.
Section 5. Liberation and Legacy. Unpacking the Gray Areas.
Following liberation by British forces under Field Marshal Montgomery in May 1945, a day where ecstatic citizens literally burned their dark blackout shades in the streets, Denmark faced a remarkably messy reality. Let's look at this brief bit of history right after the takeover ended. First, there was an immediate wave of score settling. 40,000 people were arrested on suspicion of collaboration. But think about the profound hypocrisy here. How do you define a traitor or prosecute someone for collaborating when the government itself had an official mandated policy of cooperation for over 3 years? It was legally and morally incredibly complicated. Second, the government enacted a harsh emergency currency reform. The Germans had printed massive amounts of Danish money, so the parliament literally voided all old banknotes over a single weekend, intentionally wiping out the hidden wealth of black marketeers and war profiteers. And third, there was a really dark, deeply tragic way of public reprisals. Women who had romantic relationships with German soldiers, referred to as Teiskirpige, faced brutal extrajudicial punishments, including public head shaving and severe humiliation by their fellow citizens right in the streets.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. The legacy of Denmark in World War II remains one of history's deepest, most complex gray areas. Through their rapid surrender and subsequent cooperation policy, Denmark suffered the lowest casualty rate of almost any combatant nation, physically saved their cities from total destruction, and miraculously preserved their Jewish population. Yet those incredibly successful statistics clash directly with a very deep moral stain. They actively supplied the Nazi war machine with food and industry, and they completely compromised their democratic ideals for years while the rest of Europe burned. So, what do you think? Was the cooperation policy a brilliant, pragmatic strategy to save human lives in an impossible, mathematically unwinnable situation? Or was it a dangerous moral compromise that actively enabled a totalitarian regime? It's a heavy question that historians and the Danish people themselves are still debating to this very day. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. And remember to keep questioning the history you think you know.